alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a new guest to the podcast, Gregory Philips. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Tim.
So, Gregory, whatever. I don't know. I should have, when you don't prep enough. Anyway, what could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your books?
Sure. So, again, I'm Gregory Philips. I live in Seattle, Washington, and I just released my third novel. It's called A Season in Lights. And my books tend to be fairly literary, but very accessible fiction. So I have quite a wide variety of readers who seem to enjoy my books. And I'm really excited for this one. It's probably my most personal novel to date. And again, it was released about a month ago. It's a story of passion, ambition, and escape set in the colorful artistic underworld off Broadway. And I think it's a really fun read.
Oh, cool. Fun is what I go for when I'm writing books. But obviously in a quite a different way because of the genre difference here. Yeah. Regardless, though, that sounds very interesting, actually. But you mentioned something in the process there that I thought was interesting, is that you had this pitch, this kind of emotional pitch for your stories, right? Mm-hmm. And I thought that's very interesting to me. It's intriguing because lately I've had a lot of trouble getting into reading books, right? Like that's one thing that I struggle with a lot, and it's because I'm so picky. But also, I have trouble figuring out what I want to read. I don't usually have much trouble figuring out what I want to write. You know what I mean? Does that come naturally to you? The sort of things you want to write, or do you have to kind of think things through? Do you have a targeted? Yeah.
You know, the great question. The stories do simply come to me, but they don't come that often. You know, it's but when they do, they're often very clear, and that it becomes a story that needs to be told, or a character that needs to be explored. And that's definitely what happened with this one. And interestingly, that kind of happened twice with this one. I originally wrote the story and had it finished, was starting to explore publication ideas. And then early last year, when the COVID pandemic began, I suddenly had a huge urge to tell the story of how that affected performing artists, because I'm a performing artist myself. That's something that's very close to my heart, and I have many, many friends in the industry. And so I had this book already ready and wrote an entirely new ending for it that lined up with the events of March and April of last year. So that too, at the end, it became a new portion of the story that just simply had to be told.
Oh, that's fascinating. I had one book that I'm like, I got to torpedo this concept because it was a pandemic book in a sci-fi setting. And I'm like, I don't want to do that anymore because I was coming back to it just a month ago, and I'm like, I just can't do it. I'm going to repitch this entire story. It's not what I want to do. But that's very timely, and that's interesting, to me. Again, I write my books, they're fairly far-flung. Most of my books take place in either other worlds, the far future, or both, if that's indeed possible. But writing something timely that's a challenge I'm kind of afraid of, honestly. Yeah.
It was especially interesting because I was writing the events at the end of the story literally as they were happening. So I was in March of 2020, I was writing scenes that were supposed to take place in March of 2020.
Wow.
And so I feel it gave the ending a real authenticity. And it's taken, a year to get it published, as is the way of the industry, of course. But I've intentionally left a lot of that very mildly edited because I feel that it gave some authenticity to not know how this was all going to play out.
Time capsule kind of thing in a way. Yeah. Interesting. I guess the other thing that struck me about this is you said, because when you say the stories just pop out to you, they appear and they're there, right? And that's something I've definitely experienced as well. And yet I I guess in my struggle to become more pulp style, write faster, more books, I've run into this challenge of, not all my books, the book isn't there all the time, and because I'm trying to write so many of them, I wrote one book this month, I'm going to write another one by the end of the month. Hopefully it will be, rough drafted. That's the kind of speed that you need when you're an indie sci-fi author, indie pulp fantasy sci-fi author. But I don't know. I'm trying to find a question here, but the thing is, how do you know when the book is there? I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm a lot slower. I'm more like a book every couple years.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I finish a story, the first draft of it, and I always set it aside for a while because I feel like it needs time for me to be able to come back to it with fresh eyes later on.
Mm-hmm.
And some stories, they change a little. They always change a little, but some of them, not a whole lot. This one changed drastically. The first draft, I would hardly even recognize it anymore, other than some of the scenes, of course, were the same, but the entire feel of the book changed when I incorporated the COVID into the ending.
Yeah.
So as far as when it feels done, it's always hard for me to let the book go and not make any more changes because you can always improve it. But there does come a point where I feel like this is the story as it's supposed to be. These are the characters being fully true to themselves. And at that point, to me, then it's time to, get the book out into the world.
That makes sense. On the other hand, and kind of going the other direction, I was kind of thinking, when do you know you have a book to write? I guess is the other thing that's on my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tougher question, but
especially when you have to be more choosy, I'd imagine, with not writing quite as quick.
Well, I also don't get
don't have the ideas as often. Okay.
So, and sometimes the thing is, when an idea really comes, I pretty much start writing it immediately. So, I suppose that's when I know that there's a book to write, when I had an idea and suddenly I've got 20 pages down,
Yes. No, that's actually a better answer than you may think.
It just had to come out. And that happened several times. And it's pretty exciting when it does happen.
Right. I've noticed this when I'm trying to, when I finished a book earlier this month, I'm trying to switch projects, and I'm like, I'll do this other one. This other one's been sitting on the shelf forever. I have this other concept, and I'm like, but that's not going to work. I'll try this other concept for that same series. And then I'm like, but I didn't develop that concept before, so I didn't have any idea what I was going to do. So I sat on it for a week. I'm like, this isn't going anywhere. And then today I picked up another book, and I'm like, okay, we're off to the races. It suddenly worked. Yeah. But it wasn't the book I've been trying to work on. It was just this other one that I just suddenly had some inspiration for. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like when the inspiration is there, you just have to go with it.
Mm-hmm.
And just because it can be rare. And so when the moment is there, just sit down and write.
Absolutely. I got to say, that's sitting down and writing. That's one of the. It's the only trick to writing.
Yeah, it really is.
There's no other game that you can play that gets the job done. Yeah.
Nope.
Yeah, you can try to look for the silver bullet. It just there isn't one. Anyway, yeah. So, do you? I guess when you approach, you said you're a performing artist. So when you approach a book, do you approach it like a performance, or do you approach it as something different?
Something very different. And that's a great question. I've never been asked a question quite like that before. Because a book the writing process is so personal that it's so inward, really. It's just you and the pages. And maybe you tell some people what you're working on. I rarely tell more than a few people what I'm working on until it's done. Whereas at performing arts, it's so public. You are stepping out on the stage and being seen by an audience. With books, when you actually put the book out into the world, it sometimes feels very exposing because you have this project that you've been alone with for sometimes years. And now suddenly everybody's reading it, and it's a very different feeling to me.
Oh, it makes sense. I've never been a performer professionally, or even really amateurly, but I noticed there's some parallels, but one of the biggest things I've kind of I blurred the line a little bit for myself, because sometimes I would write, I'd have my writing session live on Twitch or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
So I'd be sitting there writing, but that didn't work super well, because the internet here isn't up to twitching very much. And then I also got distracted when people started asking me questions and stuff, so it's harder to actually get the words down. Kind of counterproductive there. But I guess, and then also when I would dictate fiction, I tried dictating fiction for about a year and a half recently, and so my regular listeners, take a drink. It's that time again. No, but it's interesting because that felt more like a performance to me, because I would stand up for an hour. I would literally stand up and I'd just jabber the story for an hour, and that would be my rough draft for a couple chapters of rough draft in 1 hour. It's like, okay, boom, suddenly they all appear. But because I'm such a discovery writer, and I'm going to ask you this next, because do you discover your stories, or do you kind of plan them out? I kind of think I know the answer based on your previous answers.
I definitely discover them.
Yeah,
and to me, one of the most enjoyable parts of writing a story is when the characters start to take over. You create these characters, and then they go in directions that you didn't expect. Sometimes they go in directions they weren't supposed to go.
Yes,
but you as the writer then have an obligation to follow them, because if you've created an authentic character, then sometimes there's only one way that they can behave. So my stories rarely end as I expect them to, or even if they end where I expected, they don't get there the way I expected them to.
Yeah.
And to me, that's really fun. That's when writing is its most enjoyable to me.
Yes. Usually especially in genre books, like when I'm writing a book where, it's clear, like, we got to fight this villain, or we got to get this object or something, you kind of have an idea of how the book's supposed to end when you start it. Yeah. But I much prefer a book that whines a lot, or twists that ending a little bit, so it's not quite the same as what you'd expect. And so, kind of like Indiana Jones, the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Really good ending, because it's surprising that when you realize that, spoiler alert for this relatively old movie at this point, but Indiana Jones does not really succeed at the end. The only thing he just knows enough to not die, basically. And that is one of those things you don't expect. It's an adventure movie. You don't expect it to be powerless at the end, basically.
Exactly. I love it when an adventure movie or something of that sort ends in a way you didn't expect. The good guy dies at the end or something like that. It's like you don't, or like that one where he doesn't have the agency to
save the world. He doesn't.
Exactly. And to me, that then begins to feel more authentic.
Absolutely.
And this novel is, of course, the perfect example of not ending where I expected, because a global pandemic hit, and when I was still working on the novel, and I went with it, and the original ending is gone forever. I wrote it, and I trashed it, and this ending is, I think, way more authentic.
Absolutely. That sounds like it's going to be a huge improvement. I mean, just on the sense of, when because it's not necessarily coming out of left field, but it's developing from the story you already created.
Exactly.
And then taking into account these real events, which is very interesting. I want to also add that when you edit or rewrite your story, how light is your touch? You said before you actually approached some areas with less editing in this volume. Yeah.
So in this, really just the ending, I approached with less editing, because I wanted it to retain the feel of not knowing how the events of the pandemic are going to play
I see. So you didn't change you didn't. It's not so much that you didn't punch up stuff when you needed to.
Yeah,
you still went in there and did the normal editing. You just didn't do any. You didn't expose more than you needed to, though.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
The rest of the book was, I edited it pretty heavily, and it needed it. So it's had 2 rounds of professional editing, and then my own tweaking. As well. So it's Yeah, I'm a big believer in, yeah, editing. Always more is always better with editing, except for the specific, case of the
Yeah.
personal.
No, I mean, yeah, everyone does things their own way. I personally I prefer a lighter touch sometimes to editing because partially because again, I'm trying to go pretty quickly here, but I don't want to let people down and have a poorly edited book in the sense that it's not as good as it could be. There's this balance. That's where your answer to that previous question, the one about when do you know if it's done is it's very tricky because as obviously independently publishing, you choose when the book's done. I choose when the book's done, but I don't get to. But I don't know if it's good enough until it's out there. Basically, even if you use beta readers or ARC readers and stuff, you're not going to know what most people are going to think of the book because most of the people you're going to be able to get on your get to ARC read or beta read for, you're going to be fans already.
Yeah.
Or just people taking a shot and maybe and hopefully you pleasantly surprise them.
Right. Yeah. No, it's a difficult question for sure.
Yeah. So one of the other big writing things I always worry about though is character. And you mentioned how your characters surprise you, and I guess it's a weird thing because I don't feel like I experience surprise from my characters very often, but I also don't know anything about them. It's this kind of, so like I just can't be surprised because I don't have enough information. Not even when I start, but basically by the end of the book, I'm like, oh, well, who is this person? I have this 3-book series. I'm like, well, what's going on here? I still couldn't put into words what I know about my characters. Partially because I'm autistic, possibly. It's hard for me to comprehend that consciously. But there's also something to be said for writing unconsciously. Do you feel like, do you get in the zone, I guess is what I'm saying? Do you get in the zone when you're writing? Do you feel like you're just flowing with the story sometimes?
Sometimes. Yeah. It's definitely a mix for me between being, very conscious about it and it just flowing. There's definitely times where I have to really consciously think, okay, this is the next step I need to take the story. I'm not feeling all that inspired about this scene. I just need to do it and get to the next part where it just flows. So it's a real mix, and I just feel like I have to have the diligence to work through those times. But to me, the characters, I feel like the characters really do drive it, and I feel like I do get to know my characters very well. And sometimes I'll even, just for me, write out a very extensive backstory about my characters that I have no intention of putting into the book. And it's just for me to know this is what this character went through in previous years. Even this is what their childhood was like. And that helps me to just really get to feel like I get to know them almost like friends. And then that adds to the depth that the characters bring to the page, even if that backstory never hits the page.
That makes perfect sense. Yeah. I've done similar things. It just seems like for some reason, sometimes it seems to me like when I'm actually writing, in that moment, there's nothing there but the words, and I don't even notice and not even the words even. There's just this story, and I don't even notice the stuff that is affecting what I'm writing. It's very it's very, very weird to think about in those terms because it's not something you can describe very well, because it's kind of beyond description. But yeah. Anyway, I often find that that's probably when I'm doing my best stuff, but I cannot even examine it because I'm barely there.
Exactly. No, some of my best scenes I wrote so fast I hardly remember writing them, but they were just coming out, and there they are.
It's a great feeling, and yet kind of depersonalizing in a way. Maybe that's the it's like it's kind of like I've never had a drug trip, but it's what I imagine that might be like. Okay, like, well, oh boy, now you're out of your head. You're thinking in a different way than you're used to. Maybe the one time I was actually caught the frisbee playing ultimate frisbee back in college. Like that, but that was pretty good. I remember feeling pretty good about that. Anyway, so Gregory, when you approach a book, are you conscious of your influences? You're like the sort of stuff you've been reading. Does that make an impact on the sort of stuff you write?
It absolutely does. I'm not always conscious of it, but I am aware that there's so much influence, and often when I'm reading another writer who's really good, I think, oh, that's a good literary device that they did. I want to try to incorporate that. When it's actually happening, it's very unconscious. Mm-hmm. But when I'm reading, it's a lot more conscious.
Yeah, that's one of my difficulties with reading is I'm almost too aware of what I'm reading when I read, and then I don't pay attention to what I'm writing when I write. They're reversed activities in a way.
I'm a very slow reader, I think, because I approach it with a writer's attitude, and I'm almost studying it as I read. Mm. So it takes me a long time to read through it, to read a novel, because I often will just go back and chew on a sentence that was really good, or take my time with it.
Yeah, I like a good turn of phrase as much as anyone. What is it? There's a couple parts at the beginning of Neil Stephenson, Cryptonomicon.
Oh yeah,
which are so. There's some sentences in that that were just descriptions of like when the guy, when the guy's having a mathematical breakthrough or a logical breakthrough in the first chapter. But I couldn't get through the whole book because the whole book reads like this. It was very difficult to get through because of all the circling and all the. I find Neil Stephenson very difficult to read, but quite enjoyable when I get to him. Mm-hmm. But some of those descriptions of just what's going on in this guy's head while he's just dreaming up the solution to this equation, basically, amazing writing. And not the sort of thing I generally do, obviously different genres, but what I'm trying to get at here is there's this approach to literature where you borrow stuff rather, or steal rather, and got the Oscar Wilde on. And it's one of the most fun things I do. Because I'll come up with do you come up with concepts where you're like, oh, they'll be like this, but then we're going to replace this character with my character or something like that. Does that ever happen to you?
Not really. Okay. It's more abstract for me.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And honestly, when you're trying to do, I guess I don't want to assume this. So let me ask you, what kind of approach do you take to originality? Do you seek originality, or do you just kind of rely on it to be there?
I suppose I rely on it to be there.
Okay. No, I'm much the same way.
Yeah. When I think of a story, I can never remember being worried that, this has been done before. Mm-hmm. And, of course, every story, they say that every story has already been told. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I believe that, but there's certainly resonance between different things or different characters. But to me, originality has never been something that I've doubted or worried that I was accidentally copying something I'd read. When the good ideas come to me, they usually feel so unique that they're just a brand new thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I totally agree with that. And also seeking resonance or finding resonance is as important as having any kind of originality, if not Absolutely. More important. Because, I can't help but remember, I think it was David Farland, who wrote this little book about resonance in fiction that was... It's just an interesting concept that, this is the thing that makes people actually want to read stories in a way. Mm-hmm. Because sure, people might tell themselves they're out there to find the new thing. But when you're reading a book, how many new things are there? Like you said, the people say there's no new stories, or there's only a few stories, ever told, basically. There's only a few kinds of stories. You're not looking for something. Yeah, you can't do something completely original, and even if you could, would it be good? Would it be fun to read? It's hard to say.
I think a good story also resonates with life. Of
Absolutely,
course, going to expand on that and be a little bit more dramatic, if you will, than real life or fanciful or whatever. Mm-hmm. But people want to, and even in science fiction and things like that, people want to read something that they can relate to. And for me, writing literary fiction, that's especially true, because my characters are people that you could potentially meet on the street. They're living lives that are not dissimilar to ours, even if they're a little bit more dramatic and get into situations that, are a little bit more extreme, but they're still just normal people. And so I think that's where the resonance for me really comes in.
Absolutely. So, yeah, so it's very interesting. It's been great having you on, Gregory, but we are out of time. We run a little later, but it's one of those days. So tell people where they can find your work and what they should be looking for from you.
Yeah, so you can find my work on my website, GregoryErichPhilips.com. And Eric is spelled ERICH. So that's the website to go to. There's links to buy all my books on there. They're available at any bookstore or online retailer. And it's been great talking with you.
It's been great talking to you. And as for this podcast, you can find more of us at mentalcellularpublications.com. You can find my books on amazon.com. There should be new ones coming out soon, folks, because this is the end of May. The end of May is upon us, and that means editing week is upon me. I got 4 books on the shelf to edit, so we'll see if any of those come out early June. But no names for those just yet. I don't have any pre-order privileges on Amazon currently, so I'll let you know. Thanks for listening, everybody, and have a good week. Bye-bye.
That tears it.